The Dominion had watched Earth for almost 200 years. They first noticed the small blue planet when humans discovered radio waves and began sending signals into space without knowing who might be listening. They listened carefully. They watched humans split the atom and build weapons that could destroy cities. They watched the first rockets leave the atmosphere and the first footprints on the moon. They studied everything about this young species and made their calculations. The calculations told them that humans were weak, not physically weak, but divided. The observers counted nearly 200 different nations on one small planet. They saw wars fought over invisible lines drawn on maps. They saw humans kill each other over the color of their skin and the names they used for their gods. The analysts in the Dominion's Conquest Division marked Earth as an easy target. A species this fractured would never unite against an outside threat. They would argue while they took everything they wanted. Commander Al was given the honor of leading the Harvest Fleet. He had conquered 11 worlds before Earth, and not one of them had lasted more than a week. His strategy was simple, and it always worked. Arrive with overwhelming force. Demand surrender. Crush any resistance so completely that others would not dare to resist. He expected Earth to fall in 3 days. Perhaps 4 if the humans were particularly stubborn. The fleet arrived on a Tuesday morning in late September. 53 vessels descended through the clouds above the middle of North America. The largest ship was more than a mile wide, and it blocked out the sun as it settled over the farmlands of Kansas. Commander Al ordered the broadcast to begin. His message went out in 72 human languages simultaneously. It was not a greeting. It was a demand. The message told humanity that their planet now belonged to the Dominion. All natural resources would be extracted for the benefit of the Dominion. 1 billion humans would be selected for transport to labor colonies in distant star systems. Any resistance would result in the destruction of major population centers. Humans had 6 hours to respond with their unconditional surrender. Jake heard the broadcast on his truck radio. He was 63 years old, and he had spent 20 years flying fighter jets for the United States Air Force before retiring to run a small airfield outside of Wichita. He pulled his truck over to the side of the road and stepped out. The massive alien vessel hung in the sky above him like a mountain turned upside down. Jake had seen many strange things in his life, but nothing like this. He stood there for a long moment, just looking up at the impossible sight. Then he got back in his truck and drove to his airfield. He had work to do. Across the planet, the reaction was the same. Fear came first. People ran into the streets and looked up at the sky. They held their children close and wondered if this was the end of everything. The fear was real and it was everywhere. But something else came after the fear, something that had not predicted. Anger. In Moscow, a retired general picked up his phone and called the Kremlin. In Beijing, a group of military officers gathered around a table and began planning. In Washington, the president walked into the Situation Room and found it already full of people who had not waited to be summoned. In London and Paris and Tokyo and 100 other capitals, the same scene played out. Leaders who had spent their careers as rivals looked at each other and understood without speaking that everything had changed. The United Nations Security Council met within 6 hours of the broadcast. The meeting lasted only 40 minutes. There were no long debates. There were no accusations or political games. For the first time in the history of that organization, every single member voted the same way. The resolution was simple. Earth would not surrender. Earth would fight. Admiral received her orders aboard the USS Franklin in the Atlantic Ocean. She was a tall woman with gray hair and steady hands, and she had commanded ships for 30 years. She read the orders twice to make sure she understood them correctly. Then she picked up the intercom and addressed her crew. She told them what was happening. She told them what the aliens wanted. Then she told them what they were going to do about it. Her words were calm and clear. They would inform the visitors that humanity respectfully declined their generous offer. Then they would show the visitors why that decision was final. The crew cheered. It was not a sound of joy, it was a sound of defiance. In Kansas, Jake had gathered every pilot he knew. They were old men mostly, veterans who had flown in wars that now seemed small and distant. They stood on the cracked concrete of his airfield and looked up at the alien ship, and not one of them suggested surrender. Jake handed out assignments. Some would fly, some would coordinate, some would do whatever needed to be done on the ground. None of them asked what would happen if they failed. Failure was not something they planned to consider. The expected panic. Their psychological models predicted mass hysteria and social collapse. They expected governments to fall and populations to flee. They expected the kind of chaos that made conquest easy. What they got instead was something they had never encountered in 6,000 years of galactic dominance. They got a species that had spent 10,000 years learning how to fight. Humans had practiced war on each other since before they could write. They had developed weapons and tactics and strategies through countless generations of conflict. They had learned to be cruel and clever and absolutely relentless. All of that practice had been aimed at other humans. Now it was aimed at someone else. Commander Al received the human response exactly 6 hours after his broadcast. It came from a unified command structure that had not existed 7 hours earlier. The message was short. It acknowledged receipt of the Dominion's demands. It expressed humanity's deep disappointment that they had chosen to introduce themselves this way. It stated clearly that no surrender would be forthcoming, and it ended with a warning. The warning said that they had made a mistake. The warning said that humans did not respond well to threats. The warning said that the visitors should leave now while they still could. Commander Al read the message and laughed. He had received similar responses before from other worlds. Brave words from doomed species. He ordered his ground forces to deploy. He would teach these humans the same lesson he had taught so many others. He did not know it yet, but he was about to learn a lesson himself. The humans had a saying that Al had never heard. It went like this: "Be careful what you wish for, you just might get it." They had wished for a fight. They were about to get one. The ground forces landed outside of Houston on the 3rd day of the invasion. They chose the location carefully. Houston was a major population center with significant industrial capacity. Taking it quickly would demonstrate superiority and break human morale. That was the theory. The reality was very different. Commander Al sent 5,000 infantry units in the first wave. Each soldier wore an exoskeleton that made them 3 times stronger than any human. Their plasma rifles could melt through steel at 200 meters. Their personal shields could stop any projectile traveling below a certain velocity. They had conquered worlds with less. They expected the humans to run. Sergeant Danny Reeves was waiting for them in the tree line east of the city. He was 34 years old, and he had served 2 tours in Afghanistan before joining the Texas National Guard. He had 40 soldiers under his command, and none of them had ever fought aliens before. But they had fought. That was what mattered. Danny had studied the reports from the first 2 days of fighting. He knew about the shields. He knew about the plasma weapons. He knew that regular bullets bounced off the armor like rain off a roof. But he also knew something else. He knew that humans had spent a very long time figuring out how to kill things that were hard to kill. The first patrol walked into the ambush at exactly 1400 hours. Danny gave the signal and his soldiers opened fire. But they were not firing bullets. They were firing anti-tank missiles designed to punch through the armor of a 60-ton battle tank. The shields were good. They were not that good. The patrol ceased to exist in less than 10 seconds. Danny and his soldiers moved before the smoke cleared. They had learned that lesson in other wars. Hit hard and then disappear. Do not give the enemy time to respond. Make them afraid of every shadow and every sound. Across the city and across the world, the same scene repeated itself. Humans refused to fight the way they expected. They did not stand in neat formations and exchange fire. They hid in buildings and sewers and forests. They attacked from places they did not think to look. They used weapons that no civilized species would consider fair. Doctor worked at the Los Alamos National Laboratory in New Mexico. She was a physicist who had spent her career studying energy fields and electromagnetic radiation. When the invasion began, she was given a new assignment: figure out how the technology worked, find its weaknesses. She was given a captured shield generator from a dead soldier. She had 72 hours to understand it. She did it in 48. Her report went directly to the Joint Military Command. She explained that the shields operated on a simple principle. They detected incoming projectiles and created a repulsion field calibrated to stop objects moving at specific speeds. The shields were very good at stopping fast things like bullets and missiles, but they had a flaw. They were designed to fight enemies who used similar technology. They were not designed to fight humans. Suggested several countermeasures: slow-moving projectiles that would slip under the shield threshold, weapons that attacked in ways the shields could not predict, simple modifications to existing equipment that would make them far more effective against the invaders. Within a week, her suggestions were being implemented on every battlefield. Ben Tucker was not a soldier. He was a high school history teacher from Atlanta. He was 41 years old and he had never fired a weapon in anger in his life. But when the dropships appeared over his city, he did not run. He gathered his neighbors and his friends and anyone else who was willing to fight. He led them into the ruins of a shopping mall that they had bombed on the first day. They had hunting rifles and shotguns and baseball bats. They had kitchen knives and gasoline and glass bottles. They had everything that ordinary people could find when their homes were threatened. It was not much. It was enough. Ben organized the first civilian resistance cell in Georgia. He taught his people how to move without being seen. He showed them where to hide and when to strike. He made sure they understood that they were not trying to win battles. They were trying to make the occupation expensive. Every soldier who died was one less soldier for the enemy. Every supply convoy that burned was food and ammunition that would never reach the front lines. A local news crew found Ben after his group destroyed a fuel depot. They asked him if he had a message for the invaders. He looked into the camera with tired eyes and spoke clearly. He said that humanity was not mad at the. He said that humanity was just deeply disappointed in their poor life choices. He said that they had come to the wrong planet looking for easy victims. And he said that every single human being was armed in one way or another, not just with weapons, armed with the absolute refusal to give up. The interview was broadcast around the world. It was translated into every language. It became humanity's unofficial motto. We are not mad, we are just disappointed, and we are very armed. Commander Al watched the human resistance grow with increasing confusion. His models did not account for this. Conquered species were supposed to submit after sufficient displays of force. They were supposed to calculate the odds and accept the inevitable. Humans did not seem to understand how inevitable worked. By the end of the first week, they had taken significant casualties. They held territory, but they did not control it. Every street could hide an ambush. Every building could contain explosives. Every human face could belong to someone who was waiting for the right moment to strike. They had never faced an enemy like this. They had conquered species that were stronger than humans. They had defeated civilizations with more advanced technology, but they had never encountered a species that simply refused to accept reality. Humans did not fight because they thought they could win. They fought because fighting was what they did. They fought because surrender was not in their nature. They fought because every single one of them would rather die standing than live on their knees. Commander Al sent a message to the Dominion High Command requesting reinforcements. His report was carefully worded, but the meaning was clear. The conquest of Earth was not going according to plan. The humans were proving more difficult than anticipated. The harvest fleet needed help. Help was sent. It would not be enough. Nothing would be enough. The humans had a saying that Commander Al was beginning to understand. It went like this: you can kill a man, but you cannot kill an idea. They had come to Earth expecting to conquer a planet, What they found instead was an idea. The idea that freedom was worth fighting for. The idea that no one had the right to take what was not theirs. The idea that some things were more important than survival. That idea could not be killed. And the humans were just getting started. 6 weeks into the invasion, Commander, Al faced a problem he had never encountered before. His fleet was running out of supplies. The conquest doctrine was built on speed. Arrive with overwhelming force. Crush resistance within days. Begin resource extraction immediately. Use the conquered planet's own materials to fuel the occupation. The system had worked perfectly for 6,000 years. It did not work on Earth. The humans refused to be crushed. They kept fighting long after any reasonable species would have surrendered. They destroyed supply depots and ambushed convoys. They poisoned water sources and burned crops rather than let them fall into hands. They made the occupation so expensive that the harvest fleet was consuming resources faster than it could replace them. Al calculated that his fleet could maintain operations for perhaps 2 more months. After that, he would need to withdraw or watch his forces starve. It was an impossible situation. The Dominion had never withdrawn from a conquest in progress. The shame would be unbearable, but staying meant slow death on a hostile world. While Al wrestled with this problem, the humans were planning something he had not anticipated. They were planning to bring the fight to him. Captain Kelly was 38 years old and he commanded a squadron in the newly formed United States Space Force. Before the invasion, his job had been launching satellites and monitoring orbital debris. Now his job was killing aliens. The problem was getting up to where the aliens were. The fleet held orbit above Earth. Their ships could shoot down anything that tried to reach them. Human rockets were sitting targets during the long climb out of the atmosphere. Every attempt to launch a counterattack had failed. Studied the problem for 3 weeks. He consulted with engineers and scientists and retired astronauts. He read everything he could find about orbital mechanics and missile guidance systems. And slowly, a plan began to form in his mind. They were watching for military launches. They expected threats to come from obvious places like military bases and space centers. They were not watching civilian infrastructure quite as carefully, and they were definitely not expecting what had in mind. He called his plan the Angry Mailman Mission. The idea was simple. Use civilian rockets modified to carry warheads. Launch them from unexpected locations. Time the launches so that multiple projectiles would arrive at targets simultaneously from different directions. Overwhelm the point defense systems with sheer numbers. It was not elegant. It was not sophisticated. It was the kind of plan that only worked if you were willing to accept significant losses. Was willing, so was everyone else. The first Angry Mailman strike launched on a Thursday night. 17 rockets lifted off from locations across 4 continents. Some were commercial launch vehicles hastily converted. Some were modified-sounding rockets. Some were things that should not have been able to reach orbit at all but somehow did anyway. The defense systems destroyed 11 of them. 6 got through. The supply ship that exploded over the Indian Ocean was carrying enough food and ammunition to support ground operations for 2 weeks. Its loss hurt them badly, but more important than the physical damage was the psychological impact. For the first time, the humans had reached up and touched the invaders in their own territory. The sky was no longer safe. Weil and his pilots were delivering explosive packages to orbit. Dr. Amy and her team at MIT were working on a different problem. They were trying to understand how they talk to each other. Amy was a specialist in signal processing and cryptography. She had spent years working on secure communications for the military. Breaking alien encryption was supposed to be impossible. Their technology was thousands of years more advanced than anything on Earth. The mathematics alone should have taken decades to understand. Amy did not have decades, she had weeks, so she cheated. Instead of trying to understand the encryption from first principles, she treated it like a black box. She did not care how it worked. She only cared about finding patterns. She fed captured signals through every analysis program she could find. She borrowed processing time from every computer system that would give it to her. She worked 20-hour days and forgot to eat and did not sleep. On the 32nd day, she found a pattern. On the 35th day, she could read communications in real time. The first intercepts changed everything. Amy and her team listened to commanders arguing with each other. They heard complaints about human tactics and supply shortages. They heard confusion and fear, and something that sounded very much like despair. Lieutenant Commander Bate was assigned to analyze the intercepts. She was a Navy cryptographer with 20 years of experience, and she had never read anything like this. They were falling apart. Their discipline was cracking. They could not understand why humans kept fighting against impossible odds. Bate wrote a summary for the Joint Command. She noted that they had a word for humans in their internal communications. The word translated roughly to the unreasonable ones. It was meant as an insult. Bate suggested that humanity should take it as a compliment. The first major vessel fell 3 days later. It was a cruiser-class ship that had been providing fire support for ground operations in Europe. A coordinated strike brought it down. American F-35s flew alongside Chinese J-20s and Russian 57s. For the first time in history, pilots from nations that had spent decades as rivals flew in perfect formation toward a common target. The cruiser's shields held against the first wave. They weakened against the second. The third wave broke through. The ship fell burning from the sky and crashed into the Atlantic Ocean. The pilots who survived the mission gathered on an aircraft carrier 2 days later. They came from different countries and spoke different languages and had grown up thinking of each other as potential enemies. Now they stood together and posed for a photograph. Someone had made a banner for the occasion. It read, "We can go back to arguing after we win." Commander Al watched the cruiser fall and understood that something had fundamentally changed. This was no longer a harvest operation. This was a war, and for the first time in his long career, he was not certain he could win it. The humans had taken the fight off their planet and into space. They were learning and adapting faster than any species Al had ever encountered. Every tactic the humans studied and countered. Every weakness the humans found they exploited without mercy. Al began composing a message to the High Command. He did not ask for reinforcements this time. He asked for guidance. He asked what to do when facing an enemy that did not know how to quit. He asked if perhaps the Dominion had made a mistake in choosing this particular world. He never received an answer. The High Command was dealing with problems of its own, problems that had started on a small blue planet called Earth, problems that were spreading. The Dominion had ruled 47 star systems for more than 6,000 years. In all that time, no conquered species had ever successfully resisted them. The Dominion's reputation was built on this simple fact. Resistance was futile. Surrender was inevitable. Every civilization in the galactic arm knew this truth and accepted it. Then came the footage from Houston. A trader ship picked up the broadcast by accident. They were a quiet species that had submitted to rule 3,000 years earlier. They had learned to keep their heads down and do what they were told. They had forgotten what resistance looked like. The footage reminded them. It showed human soldiers charging a position through a storm of plasma fire. It showed tanks rolling through streets that were still burning from orbital bombardment. It showed ordinary people with hunting rifles and homemade explosives attacking enemies with technology centuries ahead of their own. And it showed something else. It showed humans winning. The trader captain watched the footage 17 times. Then he shared it with other ships. Within days, it had spread across a dozen systems. Within weeks, it had reached every corner of the galaxy. They had always controlled information about their conquests. They released carefully edited footage showing overwhelming victory and grateful submission. They never showed struggle. They never showed resistance. They certainly never showed themselves losing. The footage from Earth showed all of these things. Ambassador of the Diplomatic Corps was summoned to address the Galactic Assembly for the first time in 300 years. The Assembly was a gathering of representatives from every known civilization. It had no real power. They allowed it to exist because it gave conquered species the illusion of participation in galactic affairs. No one expected anything important to happen there. This session was different. Stood before the assembled representatives and felt something he had never experienced. He felt their eyes on him, not the dull acceptance he was used to, something sharper, something that looked almost like hope. A representative from the collective asked about the footage from Earth, dismissed it as human propaganda. The representative asked why human propaganda was showing soldiers dying, had no good answer. Another representative asked about the rumors of supply shortages in the Harvest Fleet. A third asked about the cruiser that had fallen over the Atlantic, called it an isolated malfunction. No one believed him. The session ended without resolution, but something had changed. Species that had spent in silent obedience were beginning to whisper. The whispers asked questions that had not been asked in living memory. What if they could be beaten? What if resistance was not futile after all? Greg Palmer knew nothing about galactic politics. He was a construction worker from Ohio who had been visiting relatives in Texas when the invasion started. He stayed to fight because running did not feel right. He had no military training and no special skills. What he had was a truck and a complete unwillingness to give up. The incident that made him famous happened outside of Austin. A patrol walker was moving through a residential neighborhood. These machines stood 40 feet tall and could destroy a house with a single shot. They were terrifying. They were also surprisingly vulnerable if you knew where to hit them. Greg had been watching the walkers for weeks. He noticed that they had joints where the legs connected to the body. He noticed that these joints were less armored than the rest of the machine. He noticed that a walker could not fire on targets directly beneath it. He modified his truck in a friend's garage. Steel plating welded to the frame, a pointed ram attached to the front, extra weight in the bed to give it momentum. It was ugly and dangerous and probably should not have worked. It worked. Greg drove his truck directly at the walker at 70 miles per hour. The machine tried to target him, but he was too close and moving too fast. He hit the left leg at the joint with enough force to buckle the structure. The walker stumbled. Greg reversed and hit it again. The leg collapsed and the walker fell. Someone recorded the whole thing on their phone. The footage showed Greg climbing out of his wrecked truck. It showed him dusting himself off and checking for injuries. It showed him calmly reloading a shotgun and walking toward the downed machine to finish the job. That footage reached the Galactic Assembly 3 days later. It was played in secret meetings and shared through encrypted channels. A single human with a truck had destroyed a war machine that should have been invincible. If one human could do that, then what could billions of them do? Lisa Monroe was a career diplomat who had never expected to negotiate with aliens. Now she sat across from a representative in a hidden bunker beneath the Swiss Alps. The meeting was secret. They had contacted Earth through back channels and asked to talk. Lisa was chosen because she could keep her mouth shut. The representative was small and gray with large dark eyes. He spoke slowly as if afraid of being overheard. He told Lisa that his people had not always been subjects of the Dominion. 3,000 years ago they had been free. They had surrendered without fighting because they believed resistance was impossible. They had regretted that choice ever since. He said that the footage from Earth had changed things. His people were beginning to remember what freedom felt like. Other species were remembering too. The Dominion's grip was not as strong as it appeared. Cracks were forming, and the humans were the ones who had started the breaking. Lisa asked what they wanted. The representatives said they wanted to help. Not openly. Not yet. That would be too dangerous. But supplies and information could flow through unofficial channels. Other species wanted to help too. The humans just needed to keep fighting. Every day they held out was a day that gave hope to billions of beings across the galaxy. Lisa understood. Earth's war was no longer just about Earth. General Chris Martinez addressed the combined human military forces on the one-year anniversary of first contact. His speech was broadcast to every corner of the planet. Through stolen communication arrays, it was also broadcast to 47 star systems. He spoke of sacrifice and courage. He spoke of the millions who had already died and the millions more who would die before this ended. He spoke of the enemy's strength and humanity's refusal to bend before it. Then he spoke directly to and everyone else who was listening. He said that the Dominion had come to Earth expecting prey. They were wrong. He said they expected humanity to be easy. They were wrong about that too. He said they were learning a lesson that every bully eventually learned. Sometimes the little guy hit back. Sometimes the little guy had been practicing his whole life. He finished with a promise. Humanity would not stop. Humanity would not surrender. Humanity would fight until the last human was gone or until the enemy retreated. There was no third option. Across the galaxy, billions of beings heard those words. For many, it was the first time they had heard anyone speak defiance to the Dominion. For many, it was the first time they believed that the impossible might be possible. The war for Earth continued, but it was no longer just a war for one planet. It had become something larger. It had become a war for the future of the galaxy itself. And at the center of that war stood humanity, armed, angry, and absolutely unwilling to quit. The final battle of the Disappointment War took place not above Earth but in the heart of the Dominion itself. It took humanity 3 years to understand faster-than-light technology. Doctor led the team that cracked the secret. The physics were complex, but the principle was simple. Space could be folded. Distance could be shortened. A ship that would take 10,000 years to reach another star using conventional propulsion could make the journey in days. It took another 6 months to build a fleet capable of using this knowledge. Human engineers worked around the clock in shipyards hidden underground and beneath the oceans. They combined salvaged alien components with human manufacturing techniques. They improvised and experimented and made countless mistakes. Many of them died in accidents and test flights. They kept working anyway. The ships they built were ugly. Military analysts from other species who saw the designs called them impossible. They said the vessels should not fly. They said the power systems would fail. They said the structural integrity was inadequate for faster-than-light travel. They said 100 different things that amounted to the same message. This cannot work. Human engineers had a response to those criticisms. Good enough. Admiral Nick was chosen to command the expedition. He was 54 years old and he had been fighting since the first day of the invasion. He had lost friends and family and seen horrors that would haunt him for whatever remained of his life. He had also seen humanity rise to meet a challenge that should have destroyed them. He believed in his species. He believed they could do this. The fleet assembled in orbit around the moon. 37 vessels of various sizes and capabilities. Some were built from scratch. Some were captured ships repaired and modified for human use. Some were civilian vessels pressed into military service with weapons bolted onto every available surface. Together, they represented everything humanity could throw at the enemy. Admiral addressed his crews before departure. He told them what they were about to do. He told them there was a good chance many of them would not return. He told them that if they succeeded, they would change the course of history not just for Earth, but for every species in the galaxy. Then he asked if anyone wanted to stay behind. No one did. The jump to the home system took 72 hours. The fleet emerged from faster-than-light travel in the outer reaches of an alien solar system. Ahead of them lay the Dominion. a planet that had never been attacked in 6,000 years of recorded history, a planet that had sent conquerors to 100 worlds and never faced consequences, a planet that was about to receive visitors. The defense grid detected the human fleet immediately. Alarms sounded in command centers across the planet. For a long moment, no one knew how to respond. This was not supposed to be possible. Conquered species did not travel to the Conquered species did not bring weapons. This violated every rule the Dominion had established since its founding. Admiral gave them time to panic. Then he opened communications. Commander Price had been practicing this moment for weeks. She was a communications officer who had studied language and culture since the invasion began. She understood how to speak to them. More importantly, she understood how to make them listen. Her message was broadcast to every screen on the simultaneously. Billions of citizens heard a human voice speaking their language. They heard words that no one had ever dared to speak to them before. Told them that the human fleet had not come to conquer. They had not come to enslave or destroy. They had come to deliver a message that the Dominion would remember for the next 6,000 years. She told them that humanity had been willing to live in peace. They had been willing to share their world and their future with anyone who approached them with respect. The Dominion had chosen violence instead. That was the Dominion's mistake, not humanity's. She told them that humans were not mad. They were just disappointed. Disappointed that they had thought them weak. Disappointed that they had believed fear would break them. Disappointed that humanity had been forced to travel all this way just to teach basic manners. Then she delivered the terms. The Dominion would withdraw from every system it had conquered. The Dominion would free every species it had enslaved. The Dominion would never enter human space again. These terms were not negotiable. They were not requests. They were demands. Finished with a choice. Accept these terms and the human fleet would leave in peace. Refuse and they would stay. She promised that the Dominion would not enjoy what happened next. The High Council convened in emergency session. For the first time in thousands of years, they faced a decision with real consequences. Their military advisors told them the human fleet was small. It could be destroyed. But at what cost? And what would happen when Earth sent another fleet? And another? The humans had already proven they could reach that knowledge could not be unlearned. The debate lasted 4 hours. When it ended, the High Council transmitted their response. They accepted all terms. The Dominion would withdraw. The conquered species would be freed. The war was over. Admiral received the surrender with quiet satisfaction. He did not celebrate. There would be time for celebration later. Now there was still work to do. Before the fleet departed, a private message arrived for Admiral. It came from Ambassador who had witnessed the negotiations. The message contained only a single question. We have conquered many species. None of them ever came to our home. We did not know such a thing was possible. What are you? Thought about the question for a long time. Then he typed his response. We are human. We do not start fights, but we finish them. The human fleet returned to Earth as heroes. Crowds gathered to welcome them home. Leaders from every nation gave speeches about courage and sacrifice. Monuments were planned. Songs were written. The story of the Disappointment War became the defining moment in human history. But the true impact of what humanity had done extended far beyond Earth. Across the galaxy, species that had lived under occupation began to assert their independence. They established their own government for the first time in 3,000 years. The collective expelled administrators from their systems. Dozens of other civilizations followed. The Dominion did not collapse overnight, but its power had been broken. The fear that had sustained it was gone. In the centuries that followed, humanity took its place among the stars. They were not the strongest species. They were not the most technologically advanced, but they were something more important. They were the species that had taught the galaxy a lesson. The lesson was simple. Some things were worth fighting for. Some enemies could be defeated. Some chains could be broken. And sometimes the only thing standing between tyranny and freedom was a group of unreasonable people who refused to give up. Humanity had proven that resistance was not futile. They had proven that hope was not foolish. They had proven that even the mightiest empire could fall when it faced beings who would rather die than kneel. They had come to the stars not as conquerors but as liberators, and the galaxy would never forget them. Some beings asked why humans fought so hard, why they risked everything for freedom, why they could not simply accept their fate like reasonable creatures. The answer was always the same. Because we are human, and that is what we do.